September 15th, 1992. The kitchen window faced east, catching dawn before the sun cleared the oak line that marked where Crawford land had always started. Sam Crawford sat at the scarred maple table his grandfather built in 1923, coffee going cold in the mug between his hands. 73 years old. The number felt heavier this morning than it had yesterday. The phone call from Bob Mitchell had come at 5:47. Sam knew because the kitchen clock, the one Evelyn wound every Sunday night, had shown the exact minute when everything shifted. Bob's voice carried the particular strain of a man who'd run out of options, the kind of desperation that made grown men call strangers at dawn. $620,000 of Caterpillar excavator, Bob had said. Stuck in the Madison County swamp for 3 days. Sunk to the cab in black muck that wouldn't release its grip. 2 bulldozers tried. An industrial winch tried. A crane operator took one look at the ground and refused to even unload his equipment. Sam had listened without speaking, watching dust motes drift through the early light. Bob hadn't asked for help directly. Men like Bob Mitchell, self-made, successful, proud, didn't ask. They stated problems and waited to see who offered solutions. The steamer could do it. Sam knew that with the same certainty he knew his own heartbeat. The 1912 Case steam traction engine sitting in the barn had pulled heavier loads through worse conditions. His grandfather Thomas had used it to drag a 90-ton locomotive from a collapsed rail trestle in 1927. Sam had been 8 years old, watching from the creek bank as the massive machine gripped earth that should have been impossible to grip and pulled until physics surrendered. But knowing the machine could do it and knowing he could do it at 73 were different calculations entirely. His back hurt in the mornings now. Had for 5 years, ever since that day he'd lifted a generator wrong and felt something shift in his lower spine. His knees complained on stairs. His hands, still strong, still capable, trembled sometimes when he held a coffee cup too long. Small betrayals. The body sending quiet messages that youth had ended decades ago. The excavator weighed 63 tons, the swamp would fight every inch of progress, and Bob Mitchell's crew would be watching to see if the old farmer with the antique machine could do what their modern equipment couldn't, watching to see if age had made him foolish or if old knowledge still mattered. Sam heard Evelyn's footsteps on the stairs. Since 1942, when they'd married after his return from the war, he'd learned to identify her by sound alone, the particular rhythm of her gait slightly favoring her right leg from the time she'd broken her ankle in 1984, and it hadn't healed quite straight. She appeared in the doorway wearing the blue cotton robe he'd given her 3 Christmases ago, her gray hair loose around her shoulders instead of pinned up the way she wore it in daylight hours. She didn't ask what was wrong. After their decades together, questions like that became obsolete. She crossed to the counter, poured herself coffee, and sat in the chair across from him. The one that had been hers since they'd first moved into this house as newlyweds, and her father had warned her that Crawford men were good farmers, but stubborn as fence posts driven into clay. Sam watched her hands wrap around the mug. 71 years old, and her hands still moved with the same efficiency they'd always had. No wasted motion, no hesitation. The silence stretched. Not uncomfortable. Never uncomfortable between them. Just the particular quiet of 2 people who'd learned that words weren't always necessary to communicate everything that mattered. Finally Sam spoke. Bob Mitchell's excavator is stuck in the swamp off County Road 38. Evelyn's eyes stayed on his face. Waiting. Been there 3 days. They've tried everything. Still waiting. Still reading him the way she'd always read him, better than he read himself most days. I told him I'd call him back. Evelyn set down her coffee cup. The sound of ceramic on wood seemed louder than it should have been. You're thinking about the steamer? Not a question. A statement of fact delivered in the same tone she used to identify weather patterns or note that the fence line needed repair. Sam nodded. I know the machine can do it. But you're not sure about yourself. The words landed without judgment. Simple observation. The kind of truth-telling that had defined their marriage from the beginning. She'd never coddled him, never pretended weakness was strength or doubt was certainty. She saw him clearly and loved him anyway. Sam's throat tightened. I'm 73 years old, Evelyn. What if I fail? What if the machine fails? What if I embarrass myself in front of Mitchell's whole crew? What if you succeed? The question hung between them like morning light through kitchen curtains. Evelyn leaned forward, her elbows on the table, her gaze steady. You've been firing up that steamer once a month for 5 years, driving it to county fairs, showing schoolchildren how it works. But you haven't really used it. Not the way it was meant to be used. Not the way Thomas used it. Sam felt something shift in his chest. She was right. The machine had become ceremonial. A museum piece kept running out of obligation to the past rather than purpose in the present. When had that happened? When had he stopped believing it could still do the work it was built for? I'm not Thomas, he said quietly. I'm not even close to what he was. Evelyn reached across the table. Her hand covered his warm and steady. Thomas was 62 when he pulled that locomotive. You're 73 with better equipment and more experience. And Thomas didn't have me. The simple statement carried weight beyond its words. Partnership. Their shared journey of working alongside each other, making decisions together, carrying burdens no one else could see. She wasn't offering to do the work for him. She was reminding him that he'd never done any of it alone. The kitchen clock ticked. 6:15. The sun had fully cleared the oak line, now flooding the room with September gold. If I do this, Sam said slowly, I'll need you there. I know. Not just watching, really there. Safety anchor, extra rope, someone who knows what to look for if things start going wrong. I know, Evelyn repeated. Her fingers tightened on his hand. Sam, I've been your partner for half a century. I'm not stopping now because you're finally doing something that scares you. The phone rang at 7:03. Bob Mitchell's pickup truck appeared in the driveway 17 minutes later, dust trailing behind it like smoke signals announcing desperation. Sam met him on the porch. Bob climbed out of the truck, moving like a man who hadn't slept. His clothes rumpled his face, showing 3 days of beard growth. 45 years old and successful, Mitchell Construction had built half the bridges in southern Iowa. But success didn't insulate anyone from catastrophe. Bob didn't waste time on pleasantries. I'm bleeding $25,000 a day in penalties. Insurance won't cover operator error, and according to them, driving into a swamp counts as operator error. I've spent $65,000 trying to get that excavator out, and it's sunk another 8 inches since yesterday. Sam gestured toward the kitchen door. Coffee's fresh. Inside, Evelyn had already set out 3 mugs and the sugar bowl. She poured while Bob paced the kitchen like a caged animal, words spilling out faster than he could organize them. The details piled up: survey error, unstable ground tracks, completely buried cab filling with water, every solution tried and failed. Sam let him talk. Sometimes men needed to empty themselves of words before they could hear anything else. Finally, Bob stopped mid-sentence and looked directly at Sam. Can you really pull it out with that old steam engine? The question hung in the kitchen like the smell of coffee and morning light. Sam felt Evelyn's presence behind him, not interfering, not speaking, just there, the way she'd always been there when big decisions needed making. The machine can do it, Sam said. I'm pretty sure of that. But I'm 73 years old, Bob, and if I fail, if that excavator gets damaged because I tried something foolish, you could sue me for everything I've got. This farm's been in my family since 1889. I won't risk it on pride. Bob's expression shifted. Something like respect flickered across his exhausted features. I'll sign a waiver. Whatever legal protection you need. I'm out of options, Sam. The crane operator suggested calling in a Sky Crane helicopter from Minneapolis, $18,000 an hour plus mobilization costs. By the time it gets here, I'll be bankrupt anyway. Sam glanced at Evelyn. She gave the smallest nod. Agreement, permission, partnership. I'll try, Sam said. But Evelyn comes with me. She's got an eye for problems I miss. And if I say we need to stop, we stop. No arguing. Bob exhaled like a man who'd been holding his breath underwater. When, day after tomorrow, I need time to prepare the steamer, get the chain ready, Make sure everything's sound." After Bob left, trailing gratitude and desperation in equal measure, Sam sat back down at the kitchen table. Evelyn remained standing, looking out the window toward the barn where the steamer waited under its canvas cover. "You know what this means?" she said quietly. "I know. Everyone in Madison County will hear about it. Everyone will have an opinion. Most of them will think you're foolish. I know that too." She turned from the window. "And if you succeed, you'll prove that old doesn't mean obsolete, that experience and knowledge still matter, that the ways our grandparents did things weren't just nostalgia, they were engineering that worked." Sam felt something loosen in his chest. The fear didn't disappear. Fear never disappeared completely, but it shifted, making room for something else. Purpose, maybe, or just the simple determination to keep a promise he'd made to himself 65 years ago, watching his grandfather move mountains. The barn smelled the way barns always smelled in September: dried hay, old wood motor oil, and the particular scent of machinery that had sat still but not quite silent for months at a time. Sam pulled back the canvas covering the steam engine at 9:30 that morning, revealing 24 tons of iron and steel that had been built in Racine, Wisconsin in 1912, the same year the Titanic sank. The Case steam traction engine stood motionless in the barn's dimness, its boiler painted black and polished to a gleam that caught what light filtered through the dusty windows. 6-foot rear wheels studded with 4-inch steel cleats, brass fittings that Evelyn had polished during the restoration years, the smokestack rising like a declaration that this machine had never apologized for taking up space. Sam walked around it slowly, running his hands over surfaces he knew better than he knew his own reflection. He'd restored this machine with Evelyn over 3 years, from 1984 to 1987. Found it buried under decades of dust and bird droppings in the back shed where his grandfather had parked it in 1932, thinking he might need it again someday. Thomas never did. He died in 1941 when Sam was 22, leaving the machine and the farm, and a legacy Sam had spent his whole life trying to honor. The restoration had cost $12,000 money. They'd saved carefully, money Evelyn had tracked in her ledger with the same precision she brought to everything. She'd made 47 phone calls to collectors across the Midwest, tracking down parts that hadn't been manufactured in 60 years. She'd painted the finishing work while Sam rebuilt the mechanical systems. She'd kept them on budget and on schedule and on purpose when the whole project threatened to become overwhelming. Without Evelyn, the steamer would still be rusting in that shed. Sam knelt beside the rear wheels, checking the cleats. Each one was 4 inches long, forged steel designed to bite into earth that rubber tires would just spin across. Some were worn from use in the 19-teens and 20s. Others, newer, replaced during the restoration, all of them solid. He moved to the chain locker at the rear of the machine. The chain lay coiled like a sleeping snake, links 2 inches thick, each link weighing 12 pounds. Grade 8 forged steel from 1912, rated for 85 tons. But 80 years had passed. Metal fatigued. Stress accumulated in invisible ways. Sam began inspecting each link, running his fingers over the surfaces, looking for cracks or weakness. He'd done this inspection every month for 5 years, but this time felt different. This time the chain would carry real weight under real stress. This time failure wouldn't just mean embarrassment, it could mean someone getting hurt. Evelyn appeared in the barn doorway at 10:15, carrying a thermos of coffee and the magnifying glass from her sewing kit. "Find anything?" "Not yet, but I'm only halfway through." She knelt beside him, adding her eyes to the search. They worked in silence the way they'd worked together through all their years. 2 sets of hands, 2 sets of eyes, one shared purpose. At link 47, Evelyn stopped. "Sam, look at this." He leaned closer. A hairline crack barely visible running diagonally across the link's inner curve. Not deep, not obvious. But there. Sam sat back on his heels, his heart sinking. That link won't hold under stress. "Can you replace it?" "Not with another link from the original chain. They're all 80 years old, probably all have stress fractures we can't see. I'd need a modern replacement." "Would that work? Mixing old steel with new?" Sam stood brushing dust from his knees. I don't know. Different tempering processes, different metallurgy. The old forged steel might be stronger than modern steel, or it might be weaker. I'd need to ask someone who knows. Evelyn checked her watch. Earl Hansen worked at the foundry in Winterset for 40 years. Retired now, but he lives over on Hickory Street. He'd remember the difference between old forging and modern manufacturing. Earl Hansen was 82 years old and sharp as the machinist's tools he'd used for 4 decades. He listened to Sam's description of the problem while sitting in his living room, surrounded by photographs of machines he'd worked on over the years. Old forged steel, Earl said slowly, was stronger pound for pound than most modern steel, but it was also more brittle, less flexibility. Modern steel has better elasticity, it'll stretch before it breaks. Old steel just breaks. So mixing them would create a weak point. Depends on the load and the stress pattern. If you're pulling steady, probably fine. If you're shock loading it, jerking and stopping and jerking again, that new link will flex while the old links stay rigid. That difference in behavior is where things fail. Sam absorbed this thinking through the mechanics of the pull. Steady pressure would be ideal, but the swamp wouldn't cooperate. The excavator would resist stick release, resist again. Shock loading was inevitable. What would you do? Sam asked. Earl was quiet for a long moment, staring at a photograph on the wall himself, at 30, standing beside a steam engine similar to Sam's. I'd replace that one link with the best modern steel you can find. Grade 9 if you can get it. And I'd pull smooth as you can. No jerking, no sudden stops and starts. Let the machine do what it was built to do, pull steady until the job's done or something breaks. That afternoon, Sam drove to the farm supply store in Winterset and bought a single replacement Link Grade 9 forged steel rated for 90 tons. Cost him $47. He installed it himself in the barn, while Evelyn watched replacing Link 47 with modern metal that gleamed different from the weathered links surrounding it. Think it'll hold? Evelyn asked. Sam tightened the connection pin. Earl's right about one thing, the old steel is probably stronger than we give it credit for. My grandfather pulled that locomotive with this exact chain. If it held, then it'll hold now. But doubt crept in anyway, the way doubt always did when stakes got high and consequences became real. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold. Sam and Evelyn attended services at the Methodist Church, where they'd been members for 5 decades, sitting in the same pew they always occupied, 4th row from the front left side. The congregation had shrunk over the decades. Most of the young people left for cities. Most of the old people died. The ones remaining were familiar faces aged beyond recognition, neighbors who'd become strangers through the simple passage of time. During coffee hour after the service, the whispers started. Sam heard fragments while standing near the coffee urn, pretending not to listen. Men's voices carrying that particular tone of skepticism married to concern. Heard Sam's going to try pulling Mitchell's excavator out with that old steamer of his. He's 73 years old. What's he thinking? Machine belongs in a museum, not doing heavy rescue work. Bob Mitchell must be desperate to even consider it. The women were gentler but no less pointed. Sam watched Evelyn standing near the cookie table, surrounded by 3 ladies from her quilting circle. Evelyn, you're not letting him do this, are you? Sam's too old for that kind of work. What if he gets hurt? What if that old machine breaks down? Evelyn's response carried across the fellowship hall with perfect clarity. My husband makes his own decisions, and I support them. The simplicity of the statement ended the conversation. The women drifted away, carrying judgment in their expressions, but keeping it private. Sam felt a surge of gratitude so strong it hurt his chest. Their partnership of 5 decades, her standing beside him, even when everyone else thought he was wrong. They drove home in silence. The September sun filtered through the truck's windshield, warming the cab. At the farm, Sam pulled up to the barn and sat for a moment with the engine idling. They think I'm a fool, he said quietly. Evelyn looked at him. They think you're old. There's a difference. Being old doesn't make you foolish. It just makes you experienced in ways they'll never understand until they get here themselves. What if they're right? What if I can't do this anymore? Then you'll find out. But you won't find out by sitting in this truck worrying about what other people think. Sam turned off the engine. They sat in the settling silence, hearing the tick of cooling metal and the distant sound of wind through the oak trees that marked the eastern property line. "I'm scared," Sam admitted. The words felt like confession, like admitting weakness he should have outgrown decades ago. Evelyn's hand found his. "I know. So am I." The honesty of it, the simple acknowledgement that fear was present and acceptable, loosened something in Sam's chest. He squeezed her hand. "Thomas was 62 when he pulled that locomotive. I keep thinking about that. He was 62 and I'm 73. What does that mean?" "It means you've had 11 more years of experience, 11 more years of learning, 11 more years of knowing how things work and how they break." Sam looked at his wife. Her face showed every one of those years, lines around her eyes, gray in her hair, age spots on her hands. But her eyes remained the same eyes he'd fallen in love with in 1941 when she was 20 and worked at the telephone exchange in Winterset, and he was a 22-year-old farmer trying to figure out how to run a farm after his father's sudden death. "If I do this," he said, "and if it goes wrong, Bob Mitchell could sue us for everything. The farm. Everything we've built." "I know. You're okay with that risk?" Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Sam, your father made you promise to keep the steamer running, not as a museum piece, as a working machine. You've been keeping that promise by maintaining it, firing it up once a month, showing it at county fairs. But you haven't really kept it. Not the way he meant. Not the way it was intended." The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples outward. Sam knew she was right. He'd been keeping the machine alive but not letting it live. There was a difference. "If we lose the farm," Evelyn continued, "we'll survive. We're old enough for Social Security. Russell's doing well in Cedar Rapids. We'd figure it out. But if you don't try this, if you let fear of losing things stop you from doing what you know is right, you'll lose something worse than property." "What's that?" "The certainty that you're still the man who keeps his promises." That night Sam couldn't sleep. He lay in bed beside Evelyn, listening to her breathing settle into the slow rhythm of rest, and stared at the ceiling. He couldn't see in the darkness. His mind kept returning to a moment 65 years ago, standing on a creek bank in summer heat, watching his grandfather do the impossible. 1927. Sam was 8 years old. The steam locomotive, a 90-ton monster used for hauling grain, had partially derailed on a wooden trestle over Willow Creek. The trestle had collapsed, dropping the locomotive's rear wheels into the creek bed while the front wheels remained on track. The railroad company had sent engineers from Des Moines. They'd spent 2 days calculating angles and loads and declaring the situation impossible. The locomotive couldn't be moved without specialized equipment that would take weeks to arrive. Thomas Crawford had driven his Case steam engine to the site on the 3rd day. Sam remembered the sound of it, the deep, rhythmic chuffing that seemed to make the ground vibrate, the hiss of steam from the cylinders, the particular smell of coal smoke and hot iron. The railroad engineers had laughed, actually laughed out loud at the sight of a farmer with a farm machine thinking he could move a locomotive that weighed more than his entire operation. Thomas hadn't argued. He'd just started working, rigging the chain, calculating angles, positioning the steamer on solid ground 200 feet from the creek. Sam had watched from the bank, young enough to believe his grandfather could do anything, but old enough to sense the doubt in the air around them. When Thomas opened the throttle, the steamer had responded with a sound like nothing Sam had heard before. Deep, primal, the kind of power that predated electricity and internal combustion and all the modern conveniences that were just beginning to reshape the world. The chain had gone taut. The locomotive had groaned. For 30 seconds, nothing happened. The railroad engineers shook their heads, prepared to add, "I told you so," to their reports. Then the locomotive moved. Not fast, not dramatically, just moved. 6 inches, then a foot, then 2 feet. The wheels lifted from the creek bed. The frame rose. Metal shrieked against metal, and Thomas Crawford kept his hand steady on the throttle, letting the machine do what it was built to do. 15 minutes later, the locomotive sat on solid ground. The railroad engineers stood silent. Thomas shut down the steamer, climbed down from the platform, and walked over to where Sam stood watching. His grandfather had knelt down to Sam's eye level. "You see that?" Sam nodded, too awestruck for words. "That's what happens when you build something right and maintain it right and use it for what it was meant to do. Modern isn't always better. Sometimes old ways work because they were good ways to begin with." Thomas had died 14 years later. Pneumonia took him in 3 days, February 1941. Sam had been 22, newly married to Evelyn, trying to figure out how to run a farm he'd inherited too soon. His father, Thomas's son, also named Thomas, had pulled Sam aside during the funeral reception. "The steamer," his father had said. "Your grandfather would want you to keep it running. I don't know how to operate it. I'll teach you. It's important, Sam. It's not just a machine. It's proof that what we build lasts, that we don't give up, that old knowledge still has value." They'd spent the spring and summer of 1941 working together. Sam learning to fire the boiler, manage the pressure, understand the rhythms of steam power that were already becoming obsolete as gasoline tractors took over farm work across the Midwest. By fall, Sam could operate the steamer competently. Not expertly, not the way his grandfather had, but competently enough. His father had died in 1986. Lung cancer, 86 years old. Sam had sat beside the hospital bed during those final lucid hours, holding his father's hand the way his father had once held his. "Keep the steamer running," his father had whispered. The same words, the same plea. "Promise me, Sam." "I promise. Not just running, working. The way it was meant to work. Don't let it become a museum piece." Sam had promised, and then he'd spent the next 6 years maintaining the machine, firing it monthly, taking it to county fairs and historical society events, keeping it running but not working, breaking the promise in spirit while keeping it in letter. Now lying in darkness at 3 in the morning, Sam understood what Evelyn had meant. He'd been afraid the machine would fail, afraid he would fail, afraid of looking foolish in a world that had moved past steam power and hand-forged chains and the kind of knowledge his grandfather represented. Tomorrow, today, technically since midnight had passed, he would either keep his promise properly or break it completely. There was no middle ground anymore. Beside him, Evelyn stirred. Her hand found his in the darkness. "You're awake." "I'm awake," Sam confirmed, thinking about Thomas. Both of them, grandfather and father, wondering if I'm as strong as they were. Evelyn shifted closer. Her head found his shoulder the way it had through all their years together, fitting into the hollow that seemed designed specifically for her. They were strong because they did what needed doing, not because they were fearless. "Your grandfather was terrified of that locomotive pull. Your father told me that years ago," said Thomas, shook for an hour afterward, "but he did it anyway. I don't remember him shaking." "You were 8. You saw what he let you see. The courage, not the cost." Sam absorbed this. The idea that his grandfather had been afraid, that strength wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act, despite it, settled into his bones like truth he'd always known but never articulated. "If I fail tomorrow," he said quietly, "if the machine breaks or the chain snaps or I can't do what needs doing, then we'll deal with it, together, the way we've dealt with everything since 1942. The certainty in her voice, the absolute lack of doubt, gave Sam something to hold on to. He turned toward her in the darkness, finding her face with his hand tracing the familiar lines and planes and contours that age had added but never diminished. "I couldn't do any of this without you." "I know," Evelyn said. Simple statement, simple truth. "But you're not without me. You never have been." They lay together in the darkness until gray light began filtering through the bedroom curtains. Sam felt something shift inside him, not the disappearance of fear, but the acceptance of it. Fear could exist alongside determination. Doubt could coexist with purpose. He didn't need to be fearless. He just needed to be willing. At 5:30 Monday morning, Sam rose and dressed in his work clothes, denim overalls washed soft from decades of use, flannel shirt boots resoled twice using a kit ordered from a catalog. Evelyn made breakfast while Sam sat at the kitchen table reviewing the mental checklist he'd compiled over the past 2 days. Fire the boiler at 8. Let pressure build slowly rushing steam was dangerous steam. Test all valves. Check the chain connections. Position the steamer carefully. Calculate angles. Rig the pull. Then either succeed or fail in front of everyone who'd been whispering in church about the foolish old man with the antique machine. The phone rang at 6:41. Sam's hand hesitated over the receiver. This could be Bob Mitchell calling to cancel. This could be someone else with a better solution. This could be the excuse he didn't know he'd been waiting for. He answered on the 4th ring. Bob's voice came through tight with exhaustion. "Sam, I just wanted to confirm. You're still planning to try today." "Planning to. I can't thank you enough. I mean that. Whatever happens, I appreciate you being willing to try." After hanging up, Sam looked at Evelyn. She was watching him from the stove where eggs sizzled in an iron skillet that had belonged to her grandmother. "No backing out now," she said. Matter of fact, not challenging, just stating reality. "No backing out now," Sam agreed. They ate breakfast in silence. The eggs tasted like ash in Sam's mouth, but he forced them down anyway. Energy would matter today. Strength would matter. He couldn't afford to be lightheaded or weak when the moment came. At 7:15, the phone rang again. This time, Evelyn answered. Sam heard her side of the conversation, short responses, mostly listening. When she hung up, her expression had shifted into something he recognized. Protective. Fierce in the quiet way she'd always been fierce when defending what mattered. "That was Russell. He's driving down from Cedar Rapids. Says he wants to be here just in case." Their son. 50 years old. Good job at an aerospace company, comfortable life in the city. Sam hadn't expected him to come, hadn't asked him to. But the fact that Russell understood something important was happening and chose to be present for it meant more than Sam could articulate. "When will he get here?" 9:30, he said, traffic depending. Sam checked the kitchen clock. 8 hours from now, this would be over. The excavator would be out or it wouldn't be. The steamer would have proved itself, or it wouldn't have. He would know whether promises kept through fear were stronger than promises avoided through caution. Outside September morning, light painted the barn in shades of gold and shadow. The steamer waited in darkness, 24 tons of iron and history and legacy that refused to become obsolete as long as someone believed in what it represented. Sam stood pushing back from the table. "Time to fire the boiler." Evelyn nodded. She began gathering supplies, thermos of coffee, sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. First aid kit, extra rope blanket. The practical preparations of a woman who'd spent decades making sure her husband had what he needed to do impossible things. They walked to the barn together. The morning air smelled of dried leaves and distant wood smoke. Somewhere a rooster crowed. The world continuing its ordinary rhythms, while Sam prepared to test whether old knowledge could still solve new problems. Inside the barn, Sam pulled back the canvas covering the steamer for what might be the last time. Light through the dusty windows caught the brass fittings, making them gleam like captured stars. He ran his hand along the boiler, feeling the cold iron warm slightly under his palm. "All right," he said quietly, to the machine, to himself, to the ghosts of his grandfather and father who'd trusted this iron and steel with their reputations and their lives. "Let's see what you can still do." Building fire in a steam boiler required patience that modern machinery had forgotten. Sam opened the firebox door at 8:07 that Monday morning, revealing the chamber where combustion would transform water into pressure. He'd done this ritual monthly for 5 years, but today the familiar steps carried different weight. Today the steamer would work, or it wouldn't. Today promises would be kept or broken. He started with kindling oak scraps from fence repair, dry as bone after summer in the barn loft. arranged them in a crosshatch pattern that allowed air to flow beneath. Struck a match against the rough brick of the firebox opening. The flame-caught held spread. Small fire becoming larger fire through the simple addition of fuel and oxygen and time. Evelyn stood beside him holding a bucket of coal, not speaking, just present the way she'd always been present when work needed witnessing. Sam added larger pieces of oak building heat gradually. Rush this stage and you'd get uneven heating. Uneven heating meant stress fractures in iron that had already survived 80 years. Respect the metal or the metal would fail you. At 820, flames had established themselves enough for coal. Sam added it carefully, black lumps that would burn hotter and longer than wood. The fire shifted color from orange to white gold. Heat began radiating outward, warming the barn's interior despite September morning chill. While the fire built, Sam checked the water level in the boiler. 165 gallons of capacity. He'd filled it yesterday afternoon, but evaporation and settling meant checking again. The glass gauge showed proper level 3/4 full, which would maintain pressure without risking dry fire. The process demanded 90 minutes minimum from cold iron to operational pressure. No shortcuts existed. Steam power required submission to physics and time. Modern equipment started with a key turn. Old equipment required ritual and patience and the willingness to wait for power to build the way storms built on summer horizons. Russell's truck appeared in the driveway at 9:43. Sam watched through the barn's open door as his son climbed out, moving with the particular stiffness of someone who'd driven 2 hours and hadn't stretched properly. 50 years old. When had that happened? When had the infant Evelyn nursed become a middle-aged man with gray threading his dark hair? Russell crossed the driveway to the barn. His eyes found the steamer tracked across its length, settled on Sam. "You're really doing this?" Not a question. An observation delivered without judgment but not without concern. Sam nodded. "Mom called last night, said you needed family here." "She worried too much sometimes." Russell's expression shifted into something that might have been a smile or might have been something more complicated. "She's been married to you since 1942, Dad. I think she knows exactly how much to worry." Evelyn appeared from the house carrying another thermos and what looked like extra work gloves. She handed them to Russell without speaking, then returned her attention to the steamer. Pressure gauge showed 40 pounds per square inch. Operational pressure ran 175. Still climbing. Still building toward the moment when ancient engineering would either validate itself or reveal its obsolescence. At 10:37, the pressure gauge hit 170 pounds per square inch and held steady. Sam tested the steam whistle, 3 short blasts that echoed across Crawford farmland and probably reached neighboring properties, announcing readiness, declaring intention, making noise that couldn't be taken back or ignored. He climbed onto the platform behind the boiler, settling onto the operator's seat that his grandfather had sat in for 20 years. Metal worn smooth by Thomas Crawford's weight and use. Sam's hands found the throttle, the brake, the valve controls that managed steam flow to the cylinders. Everything positioned exactly where muscle memory expected it. Evelyn climbed up beside him. The platform wasn't designed for 2 people, but they made it work the way they'd made their marriage work, adjusting, accommodating, finding space for partnership in machinery built for solitude. "You don't have to ride up here," Sam said. "You could follow in the truck." "I could, but I won't." Simple statement, simple finality. Sam felt gratitude bloom in his chest, sharp and sweet and almost painful. Whatever happened in the next hours, he wouldn't face it alone. He released the brake, opened the throttle to 10%. The steamer responded with a sound that predated gasoline engines and diesel motors and everything modern machinery took for granted, the deep, rhythmic chuffing of steam, driving pistons turning gears rotating wheels that had no speedometer because speed wasn't the point. Power was the point. Torque delivered slow and steady and inexorable. The massive rear wheels began rotating. Steel cleats bit into the barn's dirt floor. The steamer moved forward at walking pace, emerging from shadow into September morning sunlight. Russell stood in the driveway, watching, his expression unreadable. Behind him, Evelyn's truck waited with ropes and supplies and first aid kit that hopefully wouldn't be needed. Sam guided the steamer onto County Road F38. The pavement, poorly maintained, cracked from freeze-thaw cycles, and heavy farm equipment ran southeast toward the construction site where Bob Mitchell's excavator had been swallowing itself for 4 days. 2.3 miles. At 4 miles per hour, that meant 35 minutes of travel time. 35 minutes of being visible to anyone who cared to look. 35 minutes of commitment to a course that couldn't be reversed once started. The sound carried ahead of them, deep chuffing rhythm, steam hissing from relief valves, the particular rattle of chains and metal components settling into motion. People would hear it before they saw it, would wonder what anachronism had escaped from history into present day, would come to windows and driveways to watch the spectacle pass. At the Morrison farm, old Carl Morrison stood in his front yard holding a coffee cup, staring as the steamer approached. Carl was 78, had farmed the adjacent section for 55 years, knew Sam well enough to nod at church, but not well enough for deeper friendship. Carl raised his coffee cup as the steamer passed. Salute or mockery? Sam couldn't tell. Didn't matter. The gesture acknowledged something: respect or pity, or simple recognition that a neighbor was attempting the improbable. 2 miles down the road, a car pulled over. Driver and passenger both got out, phones raised, photographing the steamer as it passed. Modern technology documenting obsolete machinery. Sam felt the weight of their attention, but kept his hands steady on the controls. Throttle at 10%, speed at 4 miles per hour, pressure holding at 170 psi. Evelyn's hand rested on the platform's railing. Not gripping, not tense, just there. Steady presence that had defined their marriage from the beginning. Sam glanced at her profile. She was watching the road ahead, scanning for obstacles, the way she'd scanned for problems in everything they'd done together. Financial decisions, raising Russell, restoring this machine. Always looking ahead, always seeing what Sam might miss in his focus on immediate details. The construction site appeared at 11:16. Bob Mitchell's crew had gathered at the road's edge watching the steamer's approach. 12 men in work clothes and hard hats. Modern laborers witnessing technology their great-grandfathers would have recognized. Their expressions ranged from curiosity to skepticism to something that might have been hope. Bob stood apart from his crew, arms crossed, exhaustion written in every line of his posture. 4 days of crisis had aged him. Sam saw it in the slump of his shoulders, the hollow around his eyes, the way he stood like a man waiting for the next disaster, because disasters had become expected. Behind the crew, the swamp waited. Black water, blacker mud. And somewhere in that muck, 63 tons of Caterpillar excavator sunk to its cab in ground that refused to release what it had swallowed. Sam brought the steamer to a stop 180 feet from the swamp's edge, close enough to reach with chain, far enough to keep the steamer's weight on solid ground that wouldn't collapse under 24 tons of iron. He set the brake, adjusted the throttle to idle, checked pressure gauges one final time. Everything nominal, everything ready. Climbing down from the platform required care. Joints that complained about cold mornings and hard work and the simple accumulation of decades. Sam's boots hit earth with a jar that traveled through his knees to his hips. Age announcing itself through minor pains that younger men never noticed. Bob crossed the distance between them, his hand extended for a shake that felt more like drowning man grasping rope than greeting between equals. "Sam, thank you for coming. I know this is—" He stopped, words failing him or becoming inadequate. "I appreciate it. Let me see the situation." They walked toward the swamp. Russell followed Evelyn beside him, the two of them carrying supplies that might be needed or might become useless depending on what the next hours revealed. Sam's boots squelched in mud that had once been solid ground. The construction crew parted to let them through, their attention shifting from the steamer to Sam like he'd become the day's entertainment. The excavator sat mired 200 feet from where Sam stood, yellow paint streaked with black mud, cab windows barely visible above the muck, tracks completely buried. The machine looked like a dying animal that had stumbled into quicksand and exhausted itself struggling. Mike Sullivan, Bob's chief engineer, 40 years old and MIT educated, stood at the swamp's edge holding a clipboard with notes and calculations that had proven useless against reality. Mr. Crawford, I appreciate what you're trying to do here, but I need to be honest with you. We've tried 2 D9 bulldozers. We've tried a 65-ton winch anchored to concrete. Both failed. That excavator's stuck in muck that acts more like liquid than solid. I don't see how—" He stopped himself. Professionalism wrestling with doubt. "I just want to make sure you understand the risks." Sam studied the swamp. Black water on the surface. But beneath that he could read the terrain the way farmers learned to read land they'd worked for decades. This wasn't bottomless. This was muck over bedrock maybe 6 or 7 feet deep. The excavator had punched through a crust and sunk until it hit resistance. The key would be angle and grip. The bulldozers had tried pulling from ground level, their tracks spinning on soft earth, finding no purchase. The winch had tried straight-line force, all pressure concentrated on a single point, until the anchor failed. Wrong approaches for the problem's actual nature. Your bulldozers spin because they're designed for pushing earth, not pulling dead weight, Sam said. His voice came out quieter than intended, forcing Sullivan to lean in to hear. They've got horsepower but not torque where it matters. The steamer's got 6-foot wheels with 4-inch cleats. 24 tons of weight distributed across that contact patch. It won't spin unless something underneath gives way. Sullivan's expression shifted. Still skeptical, but listening now. Taking the old farmer's words seriously because nothing else had worked, and desperation made even unlikely solutions worth considering. What about the chain? We snapped a steel cable rated for 80 tons. Sam had been waiting for this question. Cable doesn't stretch. When it hits its limit, it breaks clean. Chain has give links flex under load absorb shock. Gives me feedback through the pull. I can feel if something's about to fail and back off before it does. You can feel it? Through the throttle, through the platform, through the sound the engine makes. Decades of working with machinery teaches you to listen. Sullivan wrote something on his clipboard. Sam couldn't see what, but the engineer's skepticism had shifted into something more complicated. Professional curiosity, maybe. Or the simple acknowledgement that old knowledge might contain wisdom that education and calculation couldn't replicate. Bob led Sam along the swamp's edge to the point where the chain would need to reach the excavator. Soft ground, unstable footing. Sam's boots sank 2 inches with each step, mud sucking at his heels when he tried to lift his feet. "I'll have to wade out there," Sam said. Bob's expression tightened. "That's 40 feet of mud and water. We haven't tested the depth. Could be 8 feet in places." "Then I'll find out." "Sam, you're 73. "I know how old I am, Bob." The words came out sharper than intended. Sam softened his tone. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm the one who knows how to rig this properly. You want this done right? I need to hook that chain myself." Evelyn appeared beside them carrying rope. She'd been quiet since arriving, watching and listening the way she always did before speaking. Now her presence carried weight. "I'll have the rope tied to Sam. If he goes under Russell and I can pull him out." Bob looked from Evelyn to Sam and back. Whatever he saw in their faces made him nod slowly. "All right. But if this gets dangerous, if you start to sink or the chain snaps or anything goes wrong, you get clear immediately. I'm not adding a 73-year-old man to today's disasters." Sam began uncoiling the chain from the steamer's rear platform. 200 feet of it, links clanking against each other with sounds that carried across the construction site. Men stopped their conversations to watch, the modern crew witnessing old methods that their training had never covered. The chain weighed 400 pounds total. Sam couldn't carry it alone. Russell moved to help, taking one end while Sam took the other. Together they dragged it toward the swamp's edge, iron links cutting furrows in soft earth. At the water's edge, Sam paused. Evelyn tied rope around his waist, simple knot. Nothing fancy, but secure enough to hold if weight needed bearing. She pulled it tight, testing, making sure. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency from decades of farm work, securing loads, anchoring equipment, creating safety where none existed before. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. Private words meant only for him, despite the crew watching 20 feet away. "Bob can hire professionals, helicopter rescue, whatever it costs." "He can't afford what it costs, and I promised." Promise to your grandfather's been dead 70 years. Your father's been gone 16. Sam looked at his wife. Really looked at her. Face lined with decades of sun and weather and concern for a husband who made foolish decisions. Eyes that had watched him since 1942 and still chose to stand beside him. I promised myself, he said, that the knowledge they gave me wouldn't die unused, that what they built would keep working as long as I could make it work. I've been maintaining that machine for 5 years without really using it. Today's the day that changes, or I'm just a curator in a museum nobody visits. Evelyn's hand touched his face. Brief contact, intimate despite the audience. Then be careful, and come back to me. Sam stepped into the swamp. The water hit his boots first. Cold despite September sun, black as oil, and smelling of decomposition and stagnant growth. His feet found uncertain purchase on mud that shifted with each movement. Second step took him knee-deep. Third step to his waist. The muck grabbed at his legs, resisting every forward motion. Behind him Russell played out rope. Evelyn watched from solid ground, her expression neutral, but her hands gripping the rope like she could will him to safety through pure force of intention. 40 feet of swamp between shore and excavator. Sam waded forward, each step requiring deliberate effort. The chain dragged behind him, adding resistance, making simple movement exhausting. At step 23, the bottom dropped away. Sam's feet found nothing solid. For 3 heartbeats he floundered, arms windmilling mud, pulling him down. The rope went taut. Russell and Evelyn's combined weight arrested his descent. Sam found footing again, solid bedrock 6 feet down. He waved behind him, signaling he was stable, then continued toward the excavator. The chain's weight multiplied in water. What had been manageable on land became brutal underwater. Sam's shoulders burned. His back protested, demanding effort from muscles that had forgotten this kind of strain. But the excavator loomed closer with each step. 15 feet, 10 feet, 5. Up close, the machine looked worse than from shore. Mud had filled the cab interior through windows left open against September heat. The excavator's frame showed stress cracks from 4 days of settling and attempted rescue. If this pull failed, if the frame gave way instead of the mud releasing, Bob would lose the machine entirely, instead of just having it stuck. Sam waded to the excavator's rear frame, where structural supports offered the strongest anchor point. He threaded the chain through, wrapping it twice, securing the connection with care that precision required. This hook had to hold. If it slipped, the pull would accomplish nothing except wasting everyone's time and confirming what the skeptics already believed. His fingers fumbled with cold and exhaustion. Simple tasks became complicated. Threading chain through frame, securing the pin, testing the connection by yanking hard 3 times, each motion requiring focus that younger hands would have managed without thought. The connection held. Sam yanked again, still held. Good enough. The return wade to shore took longer than the journey out. Exhaustion had settled into Sam's bones. Each step required conscious decision. Each breath came harder than the last. The rope around his waist felt more like anchor than safety line. Evelyn and Russell pulled from shore, helping where they could, adding their strength to his failing reserves. Sam's boots hit solid ground at 12:14. He collapsed onto the bank, breathing hard, covered in black mud from chest to boots, feeling every one of his years in the trembling of his hands and the burn in his lungs. Evelyn appeared beside him with water. Sam drank tasting mud underneath the clean liquid. His chest heaved. His vision swam slightly. The exertion had cost more than he'd anticipated. 5 minutes, Evelyn said. Not asking, telling. You sit here for 5 minutes before you get on that machine. Sam didn't argue. Couldn't argue. The 5 minutes stretched into 7 before his breathing settled and the shaking in his hands subsided enough for him to trust himself with throttle controls. At 12:26, Sam climbed back onto the steamer's platform. Evelyn remained on the ground this time, giving him space to work, trusting that he knew what he was doing, even if nobody else did. The chain stretched taut between steamer and excavator, 200 feet of iron connecting old engineering to modern machinery stuck in situations neither was designed for. Bob Mitchell stood near the steamer's front wheel, close enough to watch, but far enough to avoid being in danger if something failed catastrophically. His crew had gathered in a loose semicircle, phones out documenting either impending success or spectacular failure depending on which way the next 10 minutes went. Sam checked pressure. 170 pounds per square inch, holding steady despite the morning's operation. Good. He'd need every pound of that pressure to move 63 tons of dead weight through suction that had defeated 2 bulldozers. His hand found the throttle. 20% seemed right for initial pull. Enough to test the chain and the connection. Not enough to shock load the system and break something before the real work began. Sam opened the throttle to 20%. The steamer responded immediately. Pistons drove, gears engaged. The massive rear wheels began rotating at 15 revolutions per minute. Steel cleats bit into earth with sounds like giant walking through gravel. The chain went taut between steamer and excavator, lifting slightly off the ground as tension built. For 5 seconds, nothing happened. The excavator shuddered, frame groaning, metal stressed by forces it wasn't designed to handle. But it didn't move, didn't lift, didn't slide forward even an inch. Sam increased throttle to 35%. 25 RPM now. The steamer's chuffing grew louder, more urgent. Steam hissed from relief valves as pressure sought release. The chain hummed with tension, a low note that climbed higher as force multiplied. The excavator shuddered again, more violently this time. The mud around it rippled, but still no forward movement. Still locked in position by suction and weight, and the swamp's refusal to surrender what it had claimed. Sam pushed the throttle to 45%. 30 RPM. The steamer was straining now. He could feel it through the platform, through his boots, through his bones. This much power for this long would stress components that had operated mostly at idle for 5 years. Something would break eventually. The question was what and when. The chain stretched visibly, links elongating under load. Not breaking, not yet, but approaching limits that Earl Hansen had warned about. Old steel mixed with new, different tempering, different behavior under stress. Then the sound. Sharp crack like a rifle shot. The chain jerked. Everyone flinched, Bob's crew backing away. Russell stepping toward Evelyn. Mike Sullivan shouting something Sam couldn't hear over the steamer's noise. Sam's heart stopped. His hand flew to the throttle, ready to shut down. The chain had failed. His one chance had broken. Everything he'd promised, everything he'd believed about old engineering and old knowledge had just been proven wrong in front of witnesses who would tell the story for decades. But the chain hadn't broken. Sam stared at it, still taut, still holding, still intact from steamer to excavator without visible failure. Then what had the excavator lurched forward, 14 inches. Sudden movement after 5 minutes of resistance. Not the chain breaking, a tree root breaking. Underground wood giving way before underground iron. Relief flooded Sam so powerfully he felt lightheaded. Not failure, not yet. But the excavator had stopped moving again. Wedged harder now. The lurch forward had driven it against something solid. Boulder maybe. Bedrock outcrop. Some obstacle the mud had hidden until the pull revealed it. Sam shut down the throttle. The steamer settled to idle. Silence descended, broken only by hissing steam and the sound of men breathing again after holding breath through tension. Mike Sullivan approached the steamer, moving carefully like someone approaching unpredictable machinery. "Mr. Crawford, I think there's something underneath. A rock or formation. The excavator's wedged against it." "I felt that." "We could try explosives. Small charge to break whatever's blocking it." Sam considered this. Explosives would work. Might work. But explosives also might damage the excavator's undercarriage. Might destabilize the ground further. Might create more problems than they solved. And there was another way. Harder way. More dangerous. But a way his grandfather had used when faced with similar situations, pulling equipment from impossible positions. Bob had joined Sullivan, both men looking up at Sam on the platform like he was supposed to have answers when everyone else had run out. "What do you think?" Bob asked. His voice carried defeat already. Accepting that this attempt had failed like all the others. Just taking longer to fail. Just providing different spectacle before inevitable conclusion. Sam's mind raced backward. 65 years backward. Standing on a creek bank watching his grandfather face a locomotive that wouldn't move despite having a steam engine pulling it. Thomas Crawford had changed his approach. Instead of constant pull, he'd pulsed the throttle. On, off. Creating rocking motion. Reducing static friction to kinetic friction. Making stuck things unstick through rhythm instead of force. "I need to try something different," Sam said. The words came out quiet but carried across the construction site. Men leaned in to hear. Bob's expression shifted from defeat toward something that might have been hope or might have been desperate willingness to try anything before accepting catastrophe. "What are you thinking?" "My grandfather taught me that rock on rock doesn't slide with constant pressure. It slides with rhythm. I'm going to pulse the throttle. 3 seconds on, 3 seconds off. Create rocking motion. Work the excavator over whatever's blocking it instead of trying to pull straight through." Mike Sullivan's expression changed. Professional curiosity replacing skepticism. That could work? Physics-wise. Reduce static friction coefficient by introducing oscillation. "Or it could snap the chain," Bob said flatly. "Shock loading. Exactly what you said would be dangerous." Sam looked at the chain. At the excavator. At Evelyn standing beside Russell, her face calm, but her hands gripping each other in front of her waist. Worry she wouldn't voice but couldn't hide. He thought about his grandfather. About his father. About promises made to dying men who believed old knowledge mattered. About spending 5 years maintaining a machine without trusting it to do what it was built to do. It could snap the chain. Sam agreed. His voice stayed level, matter of fact. But constant pull isn't working. Explosives might cause more damage than they fix. This is the best option I've got. Bob was quiet for long seconds. Then he nodded slowly. "All right, try it. But if anything looks like it's failing chain excavator frame, anything you stop immediately." Sam positioned Evelyn near the steamer's side where she could see both him and the excavator. Her job was simple: watch for signs of catastrophic stress and signal him to stop if she saw frame cracking or chain links deforming. Trust her eyes because his attention would be on throttle and pressure and the feel of the machine under his hands. She nodded understanding. No words needed. Their partnership making verbal communication optional in moments when action mattered more than discussion. Sam's hand returned to the throttle. This time he'd need precision. 50% power for 3 seconds, neutral for 3 seconds. Repeat until something gave way, boulder or chain or his nerve. He took a breath, released it slowly, opened the throttle to 50%. The steamer surged. Chain snapped taut with force that made it sing. The excavator rocked forward 6 inches maybe. Then Sam closed the throttle. The chain went slack, dropping to the ground between steamer and excavator. 3 seconds of silence broken only by steam venting and men holding breath. Sam opened the throttle again. 50%. The chain leaped off the ground, going taut so fast it blurred. The excavator rocked forward again. Farther this time. 8 inches. Closed throttle. Chain slack. 3 seconds. Open throttle. Chain taut. Excavator rocking. Grinding sound from beneath the mud. Metal on stone. The boulder moving or the excavator moving over it. Progress measured in inches, but progress nonetheless. Sam fell into rhythm. On, off. 3 seconds each way. His internal clock marking time through decades of farm work that had required timing precise enough to function without stopwatches. Plant seeds too early, frost kills them. Too late, yields suffer. Pull the throttle too soon, lose momentum. Too late, break the chain. Cycle 5. Cycle 6. The excavator was moving visibly now. A foot per cycle, 2 feet. The grinding sound grew louder, metal shrieking against stone in protest and resistance and eventual surrender. Evelyn's face stayed calm. No signal to stop. Chain holding despite stress that should have broken it. Old steel and new steel working together the way Earl Hansen said they would if used right. Cycle 8. The excavator slid 3 feet forward. Sudden movement. The boulder had released or broken or simply lost its grip. The machine was free of that obstacle even if still trapped in mud. Sam's hands ached from gripping the throttle. His shoulders burned from tension. Asking his body to sustain effort it hadn't made in decades. But the excavator was moving. Actually moving. Proving that old methods worked when applied with knowledge and patience and willingness to trust engineering that predated computer calculations. Cycle 10 brought the excavator clear of whatever had held it. Sam could see it now, tracks beginning to emerge from black muck like prehistoric creatures surfacing from tar pits. The yellow paint beneath the mud. The cab windows reflecting September sun instead of being submerged. He switched from pulsing to steady pull. 60% throttle. 35 RPM. The steamer settled into the work it was designed for, pulling dead weight across impossible ground without complaint or hesitation. Just power delivered through iron and steam and gears that had been machined by hand 80 years ago. 10 feet, 20 feet, the excavator rising from the swamp like resurrection. Mud releasing its grip with sucking sounds that carried across the construction site. Bob's crew had stopped documenting with phones. They were just watching now. Witnessing something their training hadn't prepared them for. 30 feet. 40 feet. The excavator's tracks fully visible. The frame intact. The machine damaged by 4 days underwater but salvageable. Repairable. Worth the $620,000 Bob had paid for it instead of becoming total loss that would have bankrupted his company. 50 feet brought solid ground. Sam kept pulling. 60 feet. 70. 80 feet from the swamp's edge before he shut down the throttle and set the brake. The steamer settled to idle, steam venting, pressure holding, every component intact despite strain that should have broken something. For 3 seconds, silence held. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The moment suspended between completion and comprehension. Then Bob Mitchell's crew erupted, cheering, shouting, slapping each other on the back like they'd accomplished something instead of just witnessed it. Relief and disbelief mixing into noise that echoed across Madison County farmland. Sam climbed down from the platform. His legs nearly gave out when his boots hit earth. Muscles that had held tension for 40 minutes suddenly releasing. He caught himself against the steamer's rear wheel, breathing hard, vision swimming slightly. Evelyn was there, her hand on his arm, steadying him without making spectacle of his weakness. She handed him water. Sam drank, tasting mud still but not caring. The excavator sat on solid ground. The chain had held. The steamer had done what it was built to do. Bob crossed the distance between them. His face showed exhaustion giving way to something approaching joy. Relief so profound it bordered on pain. "Sam, I don't—" Words failed him. He tried again. "You just saved my company. Do you understand that $620,000 in equipment plus 4 days of penalties plus the cost of alternatives you just saved me from bankruptcy?" Sam's throat felt tight. "The machine did it. I just steered. The machine wouldn't exist if you hadn't kept it running, if you hadn't trusted it, if you hadn't been willing to try when everyone else said impossible." Bob extended his hand. Sam shook it, feeling calluses against calluses. Working men's hands. Different work, but same fundamental truth effort and knowledge and refusal to surrender when obstacles appeared. Mike Sullivan approached clipboard, forgotten professional skepticism replaced by something approaching reverence. "Mr. Crawford, what you just did, the pulsing technique. I've never seen that in any engineering manual. Where did you learn it?" "From my grandfather. He pulled a 90-ton locomotive using the same method in 1927. "That's not in textbooks. Textbooks don't know everything. Some knowledge passes person to person, father to son, grandfather to grandson. Doesn't make it less valid. Just makes it harder to find if you're only looking in books." Sullivan wrote something on his clipboard. Sam couldn't see what, but the engineer's expression had shifted into the particular look of someone revising assumptions. Russell appeared beside Sam, his expression complex. Pride mixed with concern, mixed with something that might have been understanding. "Dad, that was—" He stopped, started again. "I've never seen anything like that. Your great-great-grandfather built good equipment. Your great-grandfather maintained it right. Your grandfather taught me to use it properly. That's 4 generations of knowledge applied to one problem." The simple statement carried weight beyond its words. Legacy, continuity. The idea that what came before mattered and informed what came after. That old knowledge wasn't obsolete just because new knowledge had been added to the world. Sam looked at the steamer, at the excavator sitting safely on solid ground, at the chain that it held, despite being 80 years old, mixed with modern replacement. At Evelyn standing beside Russell, her face showing emotion she rarely let surface pride in what they'd accomplished together, even though his name would be the one remembered. His chest felt tight, not from exertion now, from something harder to name, satisfaction maybe, or vindication, or just the simple certainty that promises kept mattered more than comfort avoided. The construction crew began dispersing. Back to work. Emergency over. Crisis resolved by methods none of them understood, but all of them had witnessed. Bob remained talking with Mike Sullivan about next steps and recovery procedures and how to document what had happened for insurance purposes. Evelyn touched Sam's shoulder. "We should get you home, clean you up. You're covered in swamp mud and probably exhausted." Sam looked down at himself, black muck from chest to boots, hands trembling slightly from adrenaline crash, feeling it in every joint and muscle. "In a minute," he said. "I want to check the steamer first. Make sure nothing's stressed." He walked around the machine slowly, checking for cracks in the boiler, testing chain connections, running hands over surfaces that should have shown damage if the pull had exceeded design limits. Everything appeared sound, everything intact. The machine had done what it was built to do without complaining or failing. Russell helped disconnect the chain from the excavator. Together they coiled it back onto the steamer's rear platform, iron links clanking with sounds that would become memory. The sound of success. The sound of old engineering proving itself against modern skepticism. By 1:15 the steamer was ready to return home. Sam climbed onto the platform one final time, Evelyn beside him again. Russell would follow in his truck. Bob had offered to escort them back, but Sam declined. This last piece, the journey home, needed to be private. Just him and Evelyn and the machine that had validated everything he'd believed about legacy and knowledge and the value of keeping promises to dead men who couldn't witness their fulfillment. The steamer moved forward at 4 miles per hour. Same speed as the journey out. But everything felt different. The weight of doubt had lifted. The burden of proving himself had eased. He'd done what he set out to do, not perfectly, not without fear, but successfully nonetheless. Evelyn's hand rested on the platform railing. Same position as the morning journey, but carrying different meaning now. Partnership that had endured since 1942 and one more crisis. Her presence beside him making victory sweeter because it was shared. The road stretched ahead. 2.3 miles back to Crawford farmland, back to the barn where the steamer would return to its place under canvas until needed again, if needed again. Sam didn't know, couldn't know. But today had proven that ready mattered more than certain, that maintaining capability meant being willing to use it when circumstances demanded. They passed the Morrison farm. Carl Morrison stood in the same spot as morning coffee cup raised in the same gesture. But this time Sam knew what it meant. Respect, recognition, acknowledgement that the old farmer with the antique machine had accomplished what modern equipment couldn't. Sam raised his hand in return. Simple wave, simple connection between neighbors who understood that success didn't require celebration, just quiet recognition that something difficult had been done right. The Crawford farm appeared ahead, barn waiting, oak trees marking the eastern boundary, land that had been Crawford land since 1889. Sam guided the steamer into the barn's shadow, positioning it precisely where it had started, where it would wait until the next time, if there was a next time when old knowledge needed application to new problems. He shut down the throttle, released pressure, let the fire begin dying in the firebox. The steamer settled into silence, broken only by cooling metal and escaping steam, and the sound of his own breathing finally slowing to normal rhythm. Evelyn climbed down first. Sam followed his boots, hitting barn floor with the same jar as morning, but carrying different weight. He was exhausted, filthy, aching in places he'd forgotten could ache, but satisfied in ways that transcended physical discomfort. Russell appeared in the barn doorway. "Mom's right. You need to clean up. You look like something the swamp tried to keep." Sam almost smiled. The swamp can't keep everything it grabs. Sometimes old methods still work. The words hung in the barn's dusty air. Statement of fact, statement of faith. Statement of something that couldn't be reduced to simple declaration but needed saying anyway. Later, after hot shower and clean clothes and food that actually tasted like food instead of adrenaline and fear, Sam would tell Russell about his grandfather, about the locomotive pull, about promises made to dying fathers, about the importance of keeping old machines running not as museum pieces but as working equipment that still had purpose in a world that had mostly forgotten them. But for now, standing in the barn with mud drying on his skin and exhaustion making his vision blur, Sam just felt grateful. Grateful to Evelyn for believing when he doubted. Grateful to Russell for coming despite having his own life miles away. Grateful to Bob Mitchell for being desperate enough to try something everyone else dismissed as foolish. And grateful to his grandfather and father for building and maintaining and passing down knowledge that had mattered today in ways that textbooks and engineering degrees couldn't replicate. The steamer sat silent. Work done. Promise kept. Legacy validated for another day. The hot water in the Crawford farmhouse bathtub had gone tepid by the time Evelyn finished washing mud from places Sam couldn't reach himself. His body bore the afternoon's work in ways visible and invisible, purple bruising across his ribs where he'd pressed against the steamer's platform during the pull cuts on his hands from the chained shoulders, so stiff he couldn't lift his arms above chest height without wincing. Evelyn worked methodically, her hands gentle on damaged skin. Decades of tending farm injuries, equipment mishaps, the accumulated wear of bodies pushed past comfort into necessity. She knew where he hurt without asking. Knew when silence meant pain versus when silence meant exhaustion. "I'm not as young as I was," Sam admitted. The words came quietly, almost confession, acknowledgement of something he'd been denying through maintenance of the steamer and monthly rituals that proved capability without requiring real exertion. Evelyn's hands paused on his shoulders. "You proved something today. Not to them, to yourself." "What did I prove?" "That keeping promises matters more than keeping comfortable. That you're still the man who does what he says he'll do regardless of cost." Sam leaned back against the tub's porcelain. The water held his weight the way Evelyn's presence had held his resolve all day. Partnership extending beyond words into the simple act of being tended when tending was needed. Sleep came hard that night despite exhaustion. Sam's body ached in rhythms that matched his heartbeat's sharp pain on the inhale, duller throb on the exhale. Beside him, Evelyn breathed in the slow pattern of genuine rest. She'd earned that rest, standing beside him all day, managing details he'd been too focused to notice, being the strength he'd needed when his own strength faltered. Morning arrived whether Sam was ready or not. Tuesday, September 17th. 24 hours since he'd fired the boiler and committed to a course that couldn't be reversed. He moved slowly, getting dressed, joints protesting each motion. The face in the bathroom mirror showed someone older than he'd seen yesterday. New lines around the eyes. Grayness in skin tone that spoke of reserves depleted. Bob Mitchell's truck appeared in the driveway at 8:47. Unexpected. Sam had assumed the rescue would end with handshakes and gratitude, and both men returning to separate lives. But Bob climbed out carrying an envelope and accompanied by a woman Sam recognized from church, Margaret Mitchell, Bob's wife of 23 years. Evelyn met them at the door. She'd already made coffee. always prepared for guests even when guests arrived unannounced. The four of them settled at the kitchen table, same table where Sam had sat contemplating impossibility 3 days ago. Bob opened the envelope. A check emerged. Sam glimpsed the amount before Bob set it face down on the table. $25,000. More money than Sam had seen on a single check in his entire farming career. "Sam, you saved my business. Not just the excavator, my entire company. 4 more days of penalties and I'd have been forced into bankruptcy. This doesn't begin to cover what you did, but it's what I can afford right now." Sam pushed the check back across the table. "Donate it to the Madison County Historical Society. They helped me source parts during the restoration. Without them, the steamer wouldn't run." Bob's expression shifted. "Sam, you deserve to be paid. I don't need payment. I needed to know the machine still worked. I needed to keep a promise I made to my father. You gave me that opportunity. The Historical Society needs funding more than I need money in the bank." Margaret spoke for the first time. Her voice carried the particular authority of someone used to managing details her husband overlooked. "Mr. Crawford, we appreciate your generosity, but Bob has another proposal. We'd like to hire you as a consultant. $500 per day whenever we have equipment stuck in situations our standard methods can't handle. You'd choose which jobs to take. No obligation. Just availability when we need wisdom that engineering degrees don't teach." Sam glanced at Evelyn. She was watching him with the same expression she'd worn during the swamp rescue, neutral face, calculating eyes, seeing implications he might miss. "Evelyn comes too. She sees structural problems I overlook, catches details I miss. If you want my help, you get both of us, or you get neither." Bob's smile came genuine this time. "Deal. We'll draw up a contract. Mrs. Crawford, you'll be listed as co-consultant, same rate." After the Mitchells left their truck trailing dust down the gravel drive, Sam sat at the kitchen table holding the contract Bob had insisted on signing immediately. $500 per day split between them. Evelyn poured fresh coffee. Neither spoke for long minutes. Finally, Evelyn broke the silence. "The story's already spreading. Carl Morrison called this morning while you were in the shower. He'd heard from someone in Winterset who'd heard from Bob's crew. By tomorrow, everyone in Madison County will know what happened. I just did what needed doing. That's not how they'll tell it. They'll tell it as the day a 73-year-old farmer proved modern equipment isn't always superior. That old knowledge still has value. That experience matters more than technology." Sam felt something uncomfortable settle in his chest. Attention. Recognition. The opposite of the quiet life he'd built over 7 decades of farming land that had been Crawford land since his great-grandfather broke prairie ground. But Margaret Mitchell had other ideas. She called Thursday afternoon while Sam was checking fence line repairs. Evelyn took the message. Margaret wanted to meet just the two of them without their husbands. Coffee at the Winterset Cafe, Friday morning at 10. Evelyn had been surprised by the invitation. She told Sam about it that evening while they sat on the porch watching September sunset paint the western sky orange and purple. "What do you think she wants?" Sam asked. "I don't know, but I'm curious." Friday morning, Evelyn drove to Winterset. The cafe occupied a corner storefront on the town square unchanged since the 1950s, except for new vinyl on the booth seats. Margaret sat in a back booth, coffee already ordered, looking like someone with purpose on her mind. Evelyn slid into the opposite seat. "Margaret." "Evelyn. Thank you for coming. I know this is unusual, but I wanted to talk to you, woman to woman, about what happened Monday." Sam pulled the excavator out. "That's what happened." Margaret leaned forward, her expression intense. "Sam couldn't have done it without you. Bob told me what Mike Sullivan said, that you spotted the frame crack before they rigged the chain, that you called out the timing during the pulsing technique, that you sourced every part during the restoration. Bob's telling everyone Sam saved his company. I want to make sure people know you saved it too." Evelyn felt something shift in her chest. Recognition. Not of what she'd done, she knew what she'd done, but of someone else seeing it, acknowledging it. refusing to let it disappear into the narrative of Sam's achievement. "I appreciate that," Evelyn said quietly, "but Sam doesn't need me taking credit." "This isn't about taking credit," Margaret interrupted. "This is about making sure credit goes where it's due. My husband has built his company by learning from people who know things he doesn't. And one thing I've learned in 23 years of marriage is that behind most successful men is a woman doing half the work and getting none of the recognition." Evelyn smiled despite herself. "You're not wrong. So here's what I want to propose. When the Des Moines Register calls, and they will call, trust me, I want you to tell them the whole story. Not just Sam's part, your part. The restoration work, the problem solving, the partnership. Let people see what it really takes to accomplish something like Monday's rescue." The article ran Sunday, September 22nd. Front page of the regional section. 2 photographs, one of Sam standing beside the steamer, the other of Sam and Evelyn together, both of them with hands on the machine. Headline in bold type, 73-year-old farmer and wife, save $620,000. Excavator with 1912 steam engine. The article quoted Mike Sullivan calling the rescue the most impressive application of legacy engineering I've witnessed in 20 years. Quoted Bob Mitchell saying Sam and Evelyn had saved my company through knowledge that textbooks don't contain. Quoted Earl Hansen explaining the difference between old forged steel and modern manufacturing. But it also quoted Margaret Mitchell. Evelyn Crawford's contribution to this rescue cannot be overstated. She's been her husband's partner in every sense for 5 decades. It's time we recognize that partnership instead of pretending success happens in isolation. And it quoted Evelyn herself. The machine represents 4 generations of Crawford men who refuse to let knowledge die. My job has been making sure that knowledge gets used, not just preserved. That means being there when it matters. That's what marriage means, showing up when your partner needs you, even if showing up is scary. Sam read the article at the kitchen table, then looked at Evelyn. "You didn't tell me Margaret convinced you to talk to the reporter. You didn't ask. They made it sound like we're equal partners in this." "We are equal partners, in this and everything else. Just took the rest of the world 70 years to notice." Sam was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and took her hand. "I couldn't have done any of it without you." "I know," Evelyn said. Simple truth. Simple acknowledgement. "But it's nice hearing you say it anyway." The phone began ringing that afternoon. First call came from a construction company in Des Moines. Equipment stuck in a drainage ditch. Could Sam help? Second call from a logging operation near Dubuque. Truck bogged in a timber lot. Third call from a farmer in Polk County who'd driven his combine into ground that couldn't support the weight. Sam took notes, promised to call back, consulted with Evelyn about which jobs made sense and which would require travel or effort beyond what they could reasonably provide. Over the next 3 years, 1992 through 1995, Sam and Evelyn performed 8 more rescues using the steamer. Each one followed the same pattern. Emergency call. Sam assessing whether the job was possible. Evelyn managing logistics and safety oversight. The 2 of them arriving together. Sam operating the machine while Evelyn watched for problems. Success more often than failure. Payment always donated to the Historical Society. The Madison County Historical Society used the accumulated donations, $47,000, by December 1995 to build a new wing dedicated to agricultural equipment preservation. They called it the Crawford Heritage Equipment Hall. Sam and Evelyn attended the dedication ceremony, watched as the plaque was mounted beside the entrance. In honor of Samuel and Evelyn Crawford, whose commitment to preserving working history has enriched our community. But age accumulated faster than calendar time suggested. Sam turned 74 in December 1992. 75 in 93, 76 in 94. Each birthday brought reduced capacity. He could measure in concrete terms how long he could operate the steamer before fatigue made his hands shake, how many hours he could work before pain in his lower back became unbearable, how much weight he could lift before his shoulders protested. Evelyn saw it before he acknowledged it. started suggesting they decline jobs that required overnight travel, started insisting he rest between rescues instead of maintaining the monthly firing schedule, started being present during maintenance work that he'd previously done alone. By summer 1995, Sam knew the truth he'd been avoiding. He couldn't sustain this much longer. 76 years old, body accumulating damage faster than it healed, each rescue taking more recovery time than the last. The final rescue came in October 1995. Grain truck stuck in a creek bed near Winterset. Relatively simple job. Sam positioned the steamer, rigged the chain, made the pull with Evelyn spotting as always. The truck came free without incident. But the drive home, Sam's chest felt tight. Not pain exactly, just pressure, like something squeezing from inside. He didn't mention it to Evelyn, didn't want to worry her, assumed it was exhaustion or muscle strain or one of a dozen minor ailments that came with being 76 years old. The tightness faded by evening. Sam dismissed it, moved on, continued the routines that had defined his life for decades. August 1997 arrived hot and humid. Iowa summer at its worst, temperatures in the 90s, humidity so thick breathing felt like work. Sam was doing routine maintenance on the steamer. 78 years old now, moving slower, tiring faster, but still capable of the work he'd been doing for 56 years. He was reaching for a wrench when the pain hit. Not tightness this time, actual pain. Sharp and centered in his chest like someone had driven a spike between his ribs. His vision grayed at the edges. The wrench slipped from fingers that suddenly couldn't grip. Sam's knees hit the barn floor. He tried calling for Evelyn. No sound emerged. Just wheezing breath and the awareness that something had gone terribly wrong inside the machinery of his own body. Evelyn found him collapsed against the steamer's rear wheel. She must have been watching from the house, must have developed the habit of checking on him during work because 78 was different from 73. She appeared beside him, her hands finding his pulse, her voice steady despite fear that showed in her eyes. "I'm calling the ambulance. Don't try to move." The hospital in Winterset smelled of disinfectant and floor polish and the particular sterile anxiety of places where bodies got repaired or failed beyond repair. Sam lay in a bed surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed and monitored functions his body should have managed automatically. Dr. Morrison, 52 years old, had delivered Russell half a century ago, stood beside the bed holding a clipboard with test results. Heart attack, minor, 30% blockage in your left anterior descending artery. You're lucky, Sam. This is a warning, your heart telling you to slow down before something worse happens. Sam stared at the ceiling tiles, counting them because counting gave him something to focus on besides the fear settling in his chest where pain had been. What does that mean? No more heavy work. It means no more heavy work. Period. You're 78 years old. Your body's telling you it can't sustain the level of activity you've been demanding. Listen to it before it stops asking and just quits. That night Evelyn sat beside his hospital bed. Russell had driven down from Cedar Rapids, stood in the doorway looking uncomfortable in medical settings the way men his age often did. Sam wanted to tell them he was fine, wanted to minimize what had happened, turn it into minor inconvenience instead of major warning. But lying was useless when Evelyn was watching. She'd see through it. She always had. "The machine needs me," Sam said quietly, words that sounded foolish as soon as they emerged. "The farm needs me. I can't just stop." Evelyn's hand covered his, warm and solid and steadying in the way her presence had always steadied him. "We need you alive more than we need you working. The machine will survive without you. The farm will survive. But I won't survive watching you kill yourself because you're too stubborn to admit you're not 25 anymore." The words hit harder than the heart attack. Sam turned his face away, staring at the wall because looking at Evelyn meant acknowledging truth he wasn't ready to accept. Russell cleared his throat. Uncomfortable sound, the noise people made when forced to speak about difficult things. "Dad, I can come home, help with the farm, learn to operate the steamer if you teach me. You don't have to do this alone. You've got a good job in Cedar Rapids. Career? Life. I'm not pulling you away from that. You're not pulling. I'm offering. Evelyn's grip tightened on Sam's hand. He won't ask, Russell. Pride won't let him. But I'm asking. Your father can't do this alone anymore, and I can't help him the way he needs. We need you. The hospital released Sam 3 days later with prescriptions and instructions and warnings about what would happen if he ignored medical advice. He returned to the farm feeling diminished. Not just physically, though the weakness in his limbs was real enough, but in some fundamental sense of identity. He'd been the man who kept the steamer running, the man who rescued equipment when modern methods failed, the man who honored promises to dead fathers. Now he was just old, just broken, just someone who needed care instead of providing it. Russell moved back to Madison County in September 1997, quit his job at the aerospace company, packed up his Cedar Rapids apartment, returned to the farm he'd left 30 years ago when college had beckoned and city life had seemed more appealing than corn rows and cattle. Sam watched from the porch as Russell unloaded boxes into the old bedroom that had been his as a child. 50 years old, coming home because his father couldn't admit weakness, sacrificing his own life because family obligation demanded it. The guilt tasted like metal in Sam's mouth. That evening, Russell found Sam in the barn, standing beside the steamer, not working on it. Just standing there with one hand resting on the cold iron like touching the machine could transfer strength or purpose or certainty about what came next. "We should start training," Russell said. His voice carried the forced brightness of someone trying to make difficult situations feel normal. "If I'm going to operate this thing, I need to learn how." Sam's throat tightened. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do. Not because you're asking, because this matters. The machine matters. What it represents matters. And if you don't teach me all, that knowledge dies when you do." The bluntness of it, the acknowledgement of mortality without euphemism, shocked Sam into honesty. "I'm not ready to let go." "I know. But ready or not, it's happening. So we can do it together with you teaching me everything you know. Or we can wait until it's too late and I'll have to figure it out alone. Which would you prefer?" Training began in October. Fall mornings cold enough to see breath, but not cold enough for frost. Sam taught Russell the same way his grandfather had taught him, through demonstration and repetition and the particular patience required when explaining knowledge that seemed obvious after decades, but was entirely foreign to someone learning fresh. Firing the boiler, managing pressure, reading gauges, understanding the sounds the engine made and what each sound signified. The difference between normal operation and stress that indicated impending failure. Russell struggled, asked questions Sam didn't always know how to answer because his understanding came from feel rather than explanation. How do you teach someone to sense when the throttle needs adjusting? How do you convey the rhythm of steam power through words when words couldn't capture the visceral feedback of machinery under your hands? Evelyn became mediator, standing between father and son, translating Sam's impatience into clear instruction, translating Russell's confusion into specific questions that Sam could answer, managing the friction that arose when two men who loved each other tried working together under pressure neither had chosen. The first month, Russell could barely keep the boiler fired without Sam's constant supervision. Pressure would spike too high or drop too low. The fire would burn unevenly, creating hot spots that stressed the iron. Russell's hands fumbled with valve controls that Sam's fingers found automatically. Sam tried to hide his frustration. Failed. Snapped at Russell when pressure dropped below operational threshold for the third time in an hour. "You're not paying attention. The gauge tells you everything you need to know if you'd just watch it." "I am watching it, Dad. But you've been doing this for 56 years. I've been doing it for 3 weeks. Cut me some slack." "The machine doesn't cut slack. Either you do it right or something breaks." Russell set down the valve handle he'd been adjusting. "Then maybe I'm not the right person for this. Maybe you should sell it to a museum and be done with it." The words hit Sam like physical blow. Sell the steamer. End the legacy. Admit that the Crawford line of knowledge and skill and commitment to keeping old machines working had reached its terminus with him. Evelyn's voice cut through the tension. Both of you, outside, now." They followed her out of the barn like chastened children. She stood in the farmyard with arms crossed, looking at both of them with the expression that had settled arguments for 5 decades. "Sam, you're being an ass. Russell's learning as fast as he can. You weren't born knowing how to operate steam engines. Your father taught you, and I guarantee you made mistakes that drove him crazy. So either teach your son with patience or admit you don't actually want him to succeed, because then you'd have to face the fact that you're getting replaced." Sam opened his mouth, closed it. Nothing he could say would make Evelyn wrong. She turned to Russell. "And you. This matters to your father more than you understand. The steamer isn't just a machine. It's the only thing he has left of his grandfather and father. It's proof that his life meant something, that the promises he made mattered. So when you threaten to quit because he's being difficult, you're telling him his legacy doesn't matter enough for you to endure a little frustration." Russell's face flushed. "I didn't mean—" "I know what you meant. But here's what both of you need to understand. This training isn't about the machine. It's about family. It's about fathers and sons learning to work together. It's about knowledge passing from one generation to the next. And it's hard. It's supposed to be hard, but hard doesn't mean impossible." She looked at both of them. "Now get back in that barn and figure this out. I'll be in the house making lunch. When you're done practicing, come eat. And if you're still fighting when you show up, I'm eating alone and you can fend for yourselves." Sam and Russell stood in the farmyard after Evelyn left, not looking at each other, embarrassed by truth delivered without mercy. Finally Russell spoke. "I want to learn this, Dad. I really do. I just need you to meet me where I am instead of where you think I should be." Sam nodded slowly. "I'm scared." "Of what?" "That I'll die before you learn everything. That the knowledge will die with me. That I'll have failed the promise I made to keep this machine working." "You won't fail. But you have to let me make mistakes. That's how learning works. You watch me fail, you correct me. We try again. Eventually I'll get it right. But not if you expect perfection from day one." They returned to the barn, started over. This time Sam explained each step before Russell attempted it, showed the indicators to watch, described the feel of proper operation versus problematic operation, gave Russell permission to fail and time to learn from failing. By November, Russell could fire the boiler competently. By December, he could maintain operational pressure without constant supervision. By January 1998, he could perform basic operations, moving the steamer around the farmyard, testing the drive systems, managing the controls. But operating the machine around a barn and using it to rescue equipment from impossible situations were different skills entirely. Russell had learned the mechanics. Now he needed to learn the judgment, when to push the machine harder, when to back off, how to read terrain and calculate angles and assess risk in real time. The test came January 19, 1998. Blizzard had buried Madison County under 14 inches of snow. County snowplow had broken through ice on a farm pond sunk to its axles in freezing water. Roads Department called Sam. Emergency situation. Plow needed within hours to keep roads clear. Sam stood in the kitchen holding the phone, knowing he couldn't make this rescue himself. Doctor's orders. Evelyn's ultimatum. His own body's clear message that attempting it would risk another heart attack that might not be minor. Russell would have to go alone. The thought terrified Sam more than the swamp rescue had. At least during the excavator pull, he'd been in control. He'd known his own capabilities and the machine's limits. Now he had to trust Russell's training and hope it had been adequate. Evelyn found him at the kitchen window an hour later, watching Russell fire the boiler in the barn, watching smoke rise from the stack as pressure built, watching his son prepare to do work that Sam should have been doing. "What if he fails?" The words slipped out, fear made verbal. "What if something goes wrong and I'm not there to fix it?" Evelyn stood beside him, her reflection in the window glass showing the same concern but different response to it. "Then he learns, the way you learned, the way your grandfather learned, by doing difficult things and sometimes failing and picking themselves up and trying again. I learned with someone watching. My grandfather supervised—" Your grandfather died when you were 22. You operated that machine for 56 years, mostly alone. Russell's 50. He'll figure it out. The steamer emerged from the barn at 2:30 that afternoon. Russell at the controls, moving slowly, more cautiously than Sam would have moved, but moving, heading toward the pond where the snowplow waited half-submerged in ice water. Sam wanted to follow, wanted to supervise, wanted to be there in case something went wrong. But his body wouldn't sustain it. The cold alone would be dangerous for someone recovering from a heart attack. The exertion of rigging chain in freezing water could trigger another cardiac event. He was useless. Just an old man watching his son do work he could no longer manage himself. The wait stretched interminable. 2 hours. 3. Evelyn made dinner. Sam couldn't eat, just sat at the kitchen table listening for the sound of the steamer returning, listening for the phone to ring with news of disaster. At 6:17 the steamer's whistle sounded in the distance. 3 long blasts, the signal for successful completion. Sam's chest unclenched slightly. Russell had done it. Somehow. The plow was out. The steamer appeared in the driveway 40 minutes later. Russell climbed down, moving stiffly from cold and exertion. Sam met him at the barn door. No words came. He wanted to ask how it had gone, wanted to know every detail, wanted to critique and correct and ensure Russell had done everything properly. But Russell's expression stopped him. Pride mixed with exhaustion, mixed with something that looked like understanding. The same expression Sam had probably worn returning from his own first solo rescue decades ago. They stood facing each other in the barn's doorway, father and son, teacher and student, one generation passing burden to the next, whether either was ready or not. Sam nodded. Russell nodded back. Male communication stripped to essential gesture. Respect given and received without need for elaboration. Evelyn watched from the house. Sam saw her through the kitchen window, saw the relief in her posture, saw her hands release tension she'd been holding since Russell left. The torch had passed whether Sam accepted it or not. Over the next 4 years, 1998 through 2002, Russell performed 11 more rescues using the steamer, each one different, each one teaching him something Sam's instruction couldn't have conveyed, the feel of different terrains, the behavior of different machines under stress, the judgment required when manuals and training met reality and reality didn't care about preparation. Sam watched Russell grow into the role, watched him develop confidence, watched him make mistakes and learn from them and become competent in ways that transcended mere technical skill. But watching also meant acknowledging. Russell didn't need Sam anymore. Not for the steamer, not for the rescues. Maybe not for much of anything except being father, which required presence more than capability. Sam's role transformed. From operator to advisor, from teacher to consultant, from active participant to keeper of memory. He spent months writing everything down. 200 pages documenting operation procedures, maintenance schedules, historical context, stories about his grandfather and father, and the rescues they'd performed. Making sure the knowledge didn't die with him, even though Russell had learned most of it through practice. Evelyn helped, typing the handwritten pages on an old electric typewriter Russell had found at a yard sale, organizing the material into sections that made sense, adding her own memories of the restoration years and the rescues she'd witnessed, creating documentation that honored the past while serving the future. The manual became Sam's final contribution, tangible proof that what he'd learned mattered, that experience accumulated over 78 years had value worth preserving. By 2001, Sam had settled into a new routine. He still fired the steamer monthly, tradition mattered, ritual mattered, but Russell did the heavy work. Sam supervised, offered advice when asked, otherwise stayed quiet and let his son manage what had become Russell's responsibility. March 17, 2002 arrived cold and gray. Late winter refusing to surrender to early spring. Sam woke before dawn feeling wrong. Not pain, not illness, just a subtle wrongness in his chest and limbs, like his body understood something his mind hadn't processed yet. He lay in bed beside Evelyn, listening to her breathe, watching dawn light creep across the ceiling, thinking about everything and nothing, the steamer in the barn, the farm that had been Crawford land for 113 years, Russell asleep in his old bedroom, promises kept and promises yet to keep. Sleep returned unexpectedly. Sam slipped into it like sliding into warm water, peaceful, painless. He didn't wake up. Evelyn found him at 7:43. She'd woken, felt the bed beside her empty of warmth, turned to see Sam still there but utterly still in a way that sleep never produced. She knew before touching him, before checking for pulse that wouldn't be there, before reality became something that had to be processed and managed and survived. She sat beside him for an hour, holding his hand that was already cooling, speaking words only he would have heard if hearing still existed beyond whatever boundary he'd crossed. "You kept your promise, Sam. The machine still runs. The legacy lives. You can rest now." The funeral filled the Methodist church beyond capacity. 417 people according to the guest book Evelyn kept. Neighbors, former rescue clients, historical society members, people Sam had helped over 7 decades of farming and living in Madison County. Bob Mitchell gave the eulogy. 55 years old now, business successful. Company expanded into 3 states. All because Sam Crawford had been willing to try pulling an excavator from a swamp when everyone else said impossible. Sam Crawford taught me that old doesn't mean obsolete, that experience and knowledge matter more than technology and equipment, that keeping your word matters more than keeping comfortable. He saved my business in 1992. But more than that, he showed me what it means to be someone whose word is worth trusting. Evelyn stood in the front pew beside Russell, 81 years old, 60 years of marriage ended by biology's inevitable conclusion. She listened to Bob speak, listened to others who came forward to share memories, listened to descriptions of her husband that felt both accurate and incomplete. They buried Sam in Madison County Cemetery 3 plots from where his grandfather Thomas rested. Evelyn placed a wrench on the casket before they lowered it, one of the original tools Thomas had used maintaining the steamer 90 years ago. Sam had kept it in the barn, used it for the same purpose his grandfather had. Passing it down meant acknowledging the work was done. 4 generations of Crawford men had owned that wrench. Now it belonged to earth and memory. The weeks after the funeral blurred together. Grief didn't announce itself dramatically, just settled into Evelyn's bones like weather that refused to change. She moved through days performing necessary tasks, cooking meals for 1 instead of 2, managing farm paperwork, helping Russell navigate decisions about planting and equipment and the 1,000 details that farming demanded. But once a month she and Russell fired the steamer together, not for work, not for rescue, just for continuation. Keeping the ritual Sam had maintained for 56 years, proving the machine still functioned, honoring the promise that had defined Sam's relationship with legacy and obligation. Evelyn learned to operate the controls. Russell showed her the same way Sam had shown him through demonstration and patience and the acceptance that mastery came from repetition, not explanation. At 81, she became student to her own son's teaching, learning what Sam had known, touching the iron and steel and brass that had connected her husband to his grandfather's memory. "As long as this machine runs, Sam's here," she told Russell one October morning in 2003. The words surprised her. She hadn't planned to speak them. They just emerged, truth that felt important enough to require voice. Russell didn't respond verbally, just nodded, understanding without needing elaboration. The Crawford men and now Crawford woman communicating through gesture because some things transcended vocabulary. Margaret Mitchell had become more than client's wife in the years since the excavator rescue. She and Evelyn had developed friendship born from shared recognition, both women understanding what it meant to partner with driven men to support without being seen to contribute without receiving credit until someone bothered to look closely. They met monthly for coffee in Winterset, talked about husbands and farms and the particular challenges of aging in communities that valued youth. Margaret's friendship sustained Evelyn through grief in ways family couldn't because Margaret understood loss differently than Russell did. She'd lost her own mother 2 years earlier, knew the weight of absence. "How are you managing?" Margaret asked one November morning in 2004, 2.5 years since Sam's death. "I'm managing," Evelyn said. "Some days better than others. I fire the steamer once a month with Russell. Keep Sam's routines alive even though he's not here to perform them." "That must be hard." "It is, but it's also necessary. The machine represents more than just iron and steam. It's proof that what we build with care lasts, that promises kept matter, that Sam's life meant something beyond the years he lived." Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then, "You should speak about this publicly. The Historical Society is planning a lecture series about agricultural heritage. They need speakers. You could talk about the restoration, about partnership, about what it means to preserve working history instead of just static displays." Evelyn's first instinct was to decline. Public speaking terrified her, always had. She'd stood beside Sam for 60 years, but rarely in front of audiences. That had been his domain when domain was required. She'd preferred background where real work happened without performance. But Margaret persisted. "Women in this community need to hear your story. They need to understand that their contributions matter even when they're invisible. That partnership means more than support. That knowledge isn't gendered, it belongs to whoever bothers to learn it." The lecture happened April 2005. 60 women attended. Evelyn stood at the podium in the Historical Society's new wing, the Crawford Heritage Equipment Hall, funded by Sam's donated rescue payments, and spoke for 45 minutes. She talked about sourcing parts during the restoration, about learning steam engine mechanics alongside Sam, about being safety spotter during rescues, about the months after Sam's death when continuing his rituals kept grief from becoming overwhelming. She talked about partnership, about the invisible work women did that made men's visible work possible, about how history remembered operators but forgot the people who sourced parts and managed logistics and stood watch during dangerous operations. When she finished, the audience sat silent for 3 seconds, then applause, standing ovation, women crying, older women recognizing themselves in Evelyn's story, younger women learning that contribution didn't require visibility to matter. Afterward, a woman approached, maybe 60 years old, farmer's wife from 3 counties over. "Mrs. Crawford, thank you. My husband farms 1,200 acres. I manage the books, coordinate equipment, maintenance, handle all the logistics. But when people ask what I do, I say, I'm just a farmer's wife. Hearing you speak, I realize I'm more than that. We all are." Evelyn took her hand. "Then stop saying just. You're a partner. Act like it. Speak like it. Make sure people know." The years accumulated. 2006, 2007, 2008. Evelyn aging but staying functional. The steamer running monthly. Russell performing occasional rescues when situations demanded old methods. The pattern holding even as the world changed around it. By 2009, Evelyn was 88. Still sharp mentally. Still capable physically, though slower. Still firing the steamer once a month with Russell, even though the effort exhausted her in ways it hadn't 5 years earlier. That June, Russell broached a difficult topic. They were in the barn cleaning the steamer after the monthly firing. Evelyn was polishing brass fittings while Russell checked valve seals. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something." The seriousness in his tone made Evelyn stop polishing. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, but Cordelia called last night." Cordelia, Russell's daughter, 31 years old. Architecture degree from Boston University. Successful career designing commercial buildings in Massachusetts. Visited Madison County maybe once a year, usually for holidays. Polite, but distant. Her life oriented toward cities and modernity and things that didn't involve steam engines or farm equipment. "How is she?" "She's thinking about quitting her job." Evelyn set down the polishing cloth. "Why?" "She's been researching architectural preservation, historical buildings, techniques for maintaining old structures while making them functional for modern use. And she asked me about the steamer, about how we've kept it working all these years. about the restoration process, about what it takes to preserve working history instead of just creating museum displays. Something in Russell's voice suggested more to this story. And she wants to come visit. Not for a holiday, for a summer, maybe longer. She wants to learn about the machine, document it, photograph it, understand how we've maintained it. She's thinking about shifting her career toward preservation architecture, wants to start with family history before branching into larger projects. Evelyn felt something shift in her chest, hope mixed with caution. Does she understand what that means? Living here? Learning this? I don't think so, not fully, but she's asking, and asking is the first step. In July 2010, a car appeared in the Crawford driveway, blue sedan, Massachusetts plates. Driver who climbed out, moving with urban efficiency that marked her as someone unused to farm rhythms. Cordelia Crawford, 32 years old now, dark hair pulled back, dressed for city, not country. But her eyes carried genuine curiosity instead of polite obligation. Evelyn was in the barn when Cordelia found her, 89 years old, moving slower, but still maintaining what Sam had built and what Russell had continued. Cordelia stood in the barn doorway. Her expression showed uncertainty mixed with determination. "Grandma?" "Cordelia, your father said you might be coming." "I hope that's okay. I know it's sudden." "Nothing sudden about it. You've been avoiding this farm for 15 years. About time you showed up with purpose instead of obligation." The bluntness made Cordelia flinch, then smile. "Fair enough." Evelyn gestured toward the steamer. "Your father says you want to learn about this. I want to understand it. The engineering, the preservation. How you've kept something from 1912 working in 2010. That's not easy. That requires knowledge most people have forgotten. Knowledge your great-grandfather and grandfather and father refused to let die. Knowledge I helped preserve even though history books won't mention me." Cordelia's expression shifted. "I read the article from 1992, the one about the excavator rescue. It mentioned you and Grandpa as partners." "We were partners, in that and everything else since 1942. Took the world 70 years to notice, but eventually they figured it out. I want to document that partnership, the restoration process, the rescues, the knowledge transfer from generation to generation, not just mechanical knowledge, the whole story. Would you let me?" Evelyn studied her granddaughter, saw ambition there, but also genuine interest. Genuine respect for something she didn't fully understand yet but wanted to. "Stay the summer. Work with your father and me. Fire the boiler. Learn the systems. Understand what it takes to keep history alive. Then we'll see if you still want to document it or if the reality doesn't match the romance." Cordelia stayed. The first week she was useless. City hands couldn't grip tools properly. Urban schedule couldn't adapt to steam engine rhythms. Modern efficiency mentality couldn't accept the patience required for boiler pressure to build over 90 minutes. She got frustrated, nearly quit 3 times. Russell and Evelyn let her struggle without rescuing her. This was Cordelia's choice, her decision to make or abandon. But Cordelia had inherited Crawford's stubbornness. By week 2, her hands had stopped fumbling. By week 3, she could assist Russell firing the boiler without constant supervision. By week 4, she understood enough to ask intelligent questions instead of assuming she knew answers. July became August. August became September. Cordelia's Massachusetts apartment sat empty. Her Boston firm called twice asking when she'd return. She kept pushing the timeline back. 1 more month. Just 1 more month. In October, Cordelia made her decision. She called her firm, quit, gave them 2 weeks' notice remotely, packed up her Boston life and moved it to Madison County. Evelyn watched this transformation with emotions she couldn't quite name. Relief that the legacy would continue. Sadness that it had taken so long for Cordelia to recognize value in what her family had built. Gratitude that youth could still learn from age if given proper chance. One November evening, Cordelia found Evelyn on the farmhouse porch. Evelyn was wrapped in a blanket against cold, watching sunset paint western sky purple and orange. Cordelia sat beside her without speaking for long minutes. Finally, Cordelia broke silence. "Grandma, why did you and Grandpa keep this going? The steamer could have been sold decades ago, could have ended up in a museum. Why maintain it as working equipment instead of just preserving it?" Evelyn was quiet, gathering thoughts that had lived in her mind for 70 years but rarely needed voicing. "Your great-great-grandfather Thomas bought that machine in 1911. Used it for 20 years. Could have scrapped it in the 30s when gasoline tractors became standard. Didn't. He believed what you build with care deserves to keep working as long as someone's willing to maintain it. Your great-grandfather Thomas Jr. inherited that belief. Taught your grandfather Sam to operate the machine, made Sam promise to keep it running. Not as display, as working equipment. Your grandfather Sam kept that promise. Restored the machine with my help. Used it to prove old knowledge still has value. Taught your father Russell before his own body gave out. And now Russell's teaching you. 5 generations. 5 people who refused to let knowledge die just because time passed and the world moved on." She looked at Cordelia directly. "The machine isn't the point. The machine is proof. Proof that what we build lasts if we choose to make it last. Proof that promises kept across generations matter more than convenience or modernity or the easy surrender to obsolescence. Proof that family legacy means something beyond genetics. It means commitment to keeping alive what previous generations built." Cordelia's eyes were wet. "I wasted 15 years avoiding this, thinking my career in Boston mattered more than family history in Iowa. You didn't waste them. You needed those years to understand what matters and what doesn't. Some people never learn that lesson. You learned it. That's what counts." "What if I can't do this? What if I'm not good enough to maintain what Grandpa built?" Evelyn smiled. First genuine smile in months. "Your grandfather wasn't good enough when he started either. Neither was your father. Neither was I. We became good enough by refusing to quit when it got hard. You'll do the same." The years continued. 2011, 2012, 2013. Evelyn aging past 90. Body failing in small ways. Vision dimming, hands shaking, balance uncertain, but mind staying sharp. Memory preserving what body couldn't maintain. Cordelia absorbed everything. Learned not just mechanics but philosophy. Not just operation but purpose. Became keeper of knowledge in ways that transcended technical skill. By 2014, Cordelia was performing rescues alongside Russell. By early 2015, she was performing them alone. The 6th generation of Crawfords refusing to let the machine become obsolete. March 2015 arrived with late winter cold. Evelyn was 94. Her body had been failing for months. Falls that required stitches, infections that required hospitalization, weakness that required constant vigilance. Russell and Cordelia took turns staying with her, making sure she wasn't alone, making sure help was available when needed. On March 15th, Evelyn asked Cordelia to help her to the barn one final time. "Grandma, you're not strong enough." "I'm strong enough for this." They walked slowly, Evelyn leaning on Cordelia's arm. 94 years old but determined, the barn waited. The steamer waited. Evelyn placed her hand on the cold iron. Same gesture Sam had made thousands of times. Same connection to history and legacy and promises that transcended single lifetimes. 5 generations, she said quietly. Thomas to Sam, to Russell to you. And now your children will continue it if you have children. The machine runs because someone chose to make it run. Remember that when it gets hard. Cordelia's voice broke. "Grandma, please don't talk like... I'm 94 years old. I've lived longer than I had any right to expect. Your grandfather's been waiting 16 years. Time I stopped making him wait." They returned to the house. Evelyn went to bed that night and didn't wake up. Peaceful passing. No drama. Just the simple cessation of biological function that couldn't continue indefinitely no matter how strong the will. The funeral was smaller than Sam's had been. Most of Evelyn's generation had already died. The people who attended remembered her not as Sam Crawford's wife, but as partner who'd made his work possible. The woman who'd sourced parts and managed logistics and stood beside him when everyone else doubted. Russell gave the eulogy. 63 years old, gray-haired, carrying the farm and the legacy and the weight of being last direct link to Sam's generation. My mother taught me that partnership means showing up, being present when work needs doing, supporting without seeking recognition. She could have let the steamer rust after Dad died, could have convinced me to sell it, could have let the knowledge die with her generation. She didn't. She kept it alive long enough to pass it to mine, and now my daughter Cordelia will pass it to hers. They buried Evelyn beside Sam. The Methodist Church's cemetery holding 5 generations of Crawfords now. Thomas and his wife. Thomas Jr. and his wife. Sam and Evelyn. Someday Russell. Eventually Cordelia, if she chose this ground over whatever life might take her. After the funeral, Cordelia returned to the barn. The steamer waited, silent, patient, enduring because someone had always chosen to make it endure. She fired the boiler, built pressure slowly, let steam accumulate the way Sam had taught Russell had taught her. The ritual unchanged across 5 generations. While she waited for pressure to build, Cordelia opened Sam's manual, the leather-bound volume Russell had given her. 200 pages of Sam's careful handwriting and Evelyn's typed editions. Everything they'd known, everything they'd learned, everything they'd refused to let die. She flipped to the last page. Sam's final words written just weeks before his death in 2002. This machine doesn't quit. But more importantly, the people who believe in it don't quit. Old knowledge matters because it was good knowledge to begin with. Don't let modern replace what works. Add to it. Build on it. But don't discard it just because time has passed. Some things last because they're worth lasting. The steamer reached operational pressure. Cordelia climbed onto the platform. Her hands found controls her great-great-grandfather had designed. Her feet rested where her great-grandfather and grandfather and father and grandmother had stood. 5 generations connected through iron and steam and the refusal to let knowledge die. She released the brake, opened the throttle. The steamer responded with sounds that had echoed across Iowa farmland for 103 years, proving that what Thomas Crawford built in 1912 still functioned in 2015. Proving that promises kept across lifetimes mattered more than convenience or modernity or the easy surrender to obsolescence. The engineers had said nothing could pull that excavator from the swamp. They'd been wrong. Not because the machine was superior, not because Sam was special, but because he'd refused to believe that old meant useless, because he'd kept promises when keeping them cost everything, because he'd known that some knowledge doesn't come from textbooks, but from hands touching iron and hearts refusing to quit. And because the family he'd built through blood and through choice and through shared commitment to legacy had refused to let that lesson die with him. The steamer rolled forward, across farmland that had been Crawford land since 1889, under sky that didn't care about human timelines or generational struggles or the difference between old and new. The machine ran, the knowledge endured, the promise held. Some things lasted because people made them last.